If we look at the wars of the past, it may seem that everything is decided by numbers. The logic appears simple. The more soldiers you have, the higher your chances of victory. But history repeatedly shows the opposite. Smaller armies often defeated opponents who outnumbered them several times. Sometimes twice as large, sometimes 5 times larger, and sometimes even more. And these are not rare exceptions, but a recurring historical pattern. At first glance, such victories may seem like luck or coincidence, but when you look deeper, it becomes clear that it is not about chance. Smaller armies did not win because they were stronger in the traditional sense, but because they used different advantages that often mattered more than sheer numbers. One of the main reasons was logistics. A large army is not just a fighting force, but a complex system that constantly needs to be supplied. Soldiers must be fed, armed, transported, organized, and coordinated. In ancient and medieval times, when there was no developed transport system or fast communication, this became a huge problem. The larger the army, the harder it was to move, and the more likely it was to suffer from shortages of food, fatigue, and chaos in command. Sometimes large armies weakened even before the battle began, simply because they could not sustain themselves properly. Another important advantage of smaller armies was mobility. Smaller forces could move faster, change direction, and act unpredictably. While large armies were slow and rigid, smaller units could avoid direct confrontation and instead strike at weak points. Ambushes, attacks on camps, and raids on isolated units gradually exhausted the stronger opponent and broke their advantage. Knowledge of terrain also played a crucial role. Those fighting on their own land usually understood the landscape better. Roads, mountains, forests, and rivers. They knew where movement was easy and where an enemy army would slow down or become trapped. In unfamiliar territory, even a very large army could become vulnerable simply because it was operating blindly, while smaller forces used every feature of the terrain to their advantage. The human factor was also important. Large armies were often made up of diverse groups, sometimes including allies or mercenaries who did not always share the same level of motivation. Smaller armies, on the other hand, were often more unified, fighting for their homeland, their families, and their survival. In battle, this could make a huge difference, as discipline and motivation sometimes matter more than numbers. Command errors were another critical factor. The larger the army, the harder it is to control. A single wrong order, a delay, or a poor tactical decision could lead to disaster even for a powerful force. History is full of examples where battles were decided by leadership mistakes rather than by the strength of the soldiers themselves. Sometimes psychology also played a role. Large armies could become overconfident, underestimating their opponent. Meanwhile, smaller forces often knew they had no room for error and fought with greater determination. This difference in mindset could completely change the outcome of a battle. Over time, it became clear that numbers are only one factor in war, and not always the most important one. Smaller armies won not because they broke the rules of war, but because they exploited its other laws: speed, terrain knowledge, discipline, motivation, and the enemy's weaknesses. And that is why history so often shows the same paradox. Victory does not always go to the side with more soldiers, but to the side that better understands how war actually works.